Our scripture reading this morning comes from Hebrews chapter 3. We talked last week about the first week of our series. We talked about Jesus being the ultimate, the most majestic, the witness to God on the earth. And then last week we talked about the ways that can sometimes be confusing or hard for us to understand. What exactly does it mean that Jesus is the Lord of the earth? And today we are going to hear about what the original preachers of Hebrews says about how that impacts our lives. What are some ways that we can use that as a guidepost for how we live? So let's listen to what he has to say. Therefore, brothers and sisters who are partners in the heavenly calling, think about Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. Jesus was faithful to the one who appointed him, just like Moses was faithful in God's house. But he deserves greater glory than Moses in the same way that the builder of the house deserves more honor than the house itself. Every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant in order to affirm the things that would be spoken later. But Jesus was faithful over God's house as a son. We are his house if we hold on to the confidence and the pride that our hope gives us. So watch out, brothers and sisters, that none of you have an evil, unfaithful heart that abandons the living God. Instead, encourage each other every day, as long as it's called today, so that none of you become insensitive to God because of sin's deception. We are partners with Christ, but only if we hold on to the confidence we had in the beginning until the end. When it says, today, if you hear his voice, don't have stubborn hearts. Who was it who rebelled when they heard God's voice? Wasn't it all of those who were brought out of Egypt by Moses? And with whom was God angry for 40 years? Wasn't it the same ones who sinned, whose bodies fell in the desert? And against whom did God swear that they would never enter rest, if not against the ones who were disobedient? We see they couldn't enter because of their lack of faith. Therefore, since the promise that we can enter into rest is still open, let's be careful so that none of you will appear to miss out. We also had the good news preached to us just as the Israelites did. However, the message they heard didn't help them because they weren't united in faith with the ones who heard it. God's works were complete at the foundations of the world. Then somewhere he said this about the seventh day: God rested on the seventh day. But again, in the passage above, God said, they will never enter my rest. Therefore, it's left open for some to enter it. Just as it says, God designates a certain day as today. If Joshua gave the Israelites rest, God wouldn't have spoken about another day later on. So you see, a Sabbath rest is left open for God's people. The ones who entered God's rest also rested from his work, just as God rested from his own. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So mirrors have always been sort of a fascinating thing for me. If you've ever seen a toddler or a newborn discover their own reflection in the mirror for the first time, it's sort of this little magical moment where they realize that they can see themselves, right? And they try to touch the mirror and bang on the mirror, and they become sort of obsessed with the mirror. Mirrors are this little magical, wonderful thing. And I've been thinking a lot about the difference between an actual physical mirror and human mirrors in your life. This came up to me the other day because I was talking with one of my kids about becoming a parent one day, if they were going to become a parent one day. And I said, do you feel like, you're ready? We prepared you to become a parent? They're not anywhere close to that stage of their life. But, it's important to start early, I guess. So we talked about what kind of parents they were going to be like. And one of them looked at me and said, I know exactly what I'm going to be like as a parent. I've been watching you. I chose not to explore that any further. Because, sometimes that is a good thing. I've been watching you. I've been learning how to be an excellent, exceptional parent, because of course that's what they meant. But sometimes it also means I've been watching you and I'm going to do everything exactly the opposite of what you have done. All of us have that moment in our lives where we become old enough that we realize we are turning into our parents. We do things our parents do without even thinking about it. I legitimately turned around in the van yesterday and said to my children, "I will stop this car." Which I swore I would never say. I will stop this car. I also one time said, close the door, we're not cooling the outside. We're not paying to air condition the outside, close the door. Which my father says every time we go to his house, at least 28 times a day. He can be anywhere in the house and magically sense that there's a door open somewhere in the house. And so we are paying to air condition the outdoors. There's any number of these dadisms I know we all secretly hold in our hearts. So people can be a mirror to us of our own behavior. We took the kids to play tennis the other day. We play tennis on the pickleball courts because the kids are not big enough to really play tennis on the tennis ball courts. So that's not as much fun. So we play tennis on the pickleball courts where they can actually hit the ball over the net, and there's a little bit of a game to be had. And we were sitting at the pickleball court. I was sitting on the side reading a book because that's what I do. That's how I play pickleball. And I was reading this book, and as I was reading it, I could hear from another pickleball court the most annoying human being I have ever heard in my entire life. And that's saying something. It was so annoying that even Jeremy was annoyed by this person. And Jeremy is not annoyed by anyone. He's a 6th grade teacher. He cannot be annoyed by any human beings on the earth except for this pickleball guy. This pickleball guy was playing with this lady who was learning how to play pickleball. She was a newbie, you could tell. Mostly because she kept saying, "I've never played pickleball before." So he took it upon himself to condescendingly tell her how to do everything that you should ever do about pickleball. And constantly, they played for 15 minutes. That man did not stop talking for 15 minutes. He would say things like, "Well, at least you hit it to my backhand, so it was kind of hard." Or, "You can't hit the ball from there. That's illegal in pickleball." The court's like this big. I didn't know there were places you can't, someone who actually plays this is going to have to explain the rules to me. He had a comment for every single thing that girl did the entire time that they played. Hold the paddle ball in your other hand. Hit the ball lower so it's harder for me to reach. For 15 minutes, this guy told this lady who had just begun everything she had to do in order to be an amazing and wonderful pickleball player, as he clearly was. He self-declared himself to be an amazing pickleball player. And that's all well and good, I guess. But when I got home, I was helping the kids do something and found myself doing the exact same thing that he was doing. "No, put it over there. No, put it over there. No, pick it up. That's not how we do that. No, put your shoes away." For like 20 minutes, I had a comment for every single thing that my child was doing, which is equally annoying. It also teaches my kids that they're not capable of making decisions for themselves or doing things correctly on their own, or that things have to be done so precisely in order for them to be done at all. It creates sort of this, constant hectoring helicopter parenting for me. And I think I was only aware that I was doing it because I had spent 15 minutes with an annoying pickleball guy who was doing the same thing. People can be mirrors in our lives. People are mirrors in our lives, whether we like it or not. We are mirrors, reflections of all of the people we have come in contact with in our lives. We reflect their behaviors, their attitudes. We are an image often reflected off of somebody else, whether that's a good or bad reflection. We do not sprout out of the earth fully formed, but are changed, are shaped by the people in our lives. And it's really important that we choose to have good mirrors. Because one of the things about mirrors is that they can also lie to you. We can look in the mirror and see things about ourselves that nobody else would have ever noticed about us. Have you ever done that? Have you stood in the mirror in the bathroom and started noticing all the things that you don't like about your face? or all the things that maybe are a little bit wrong. Have you ever sat there and picked out the new wrinkle that you didn't discover that you had until the last time? That wrinkle couldn't have been there the last time I looked in the mirror. Mirrors lie to us. One of the first things they do when people go to eating disorder clinics, people who have restricted their eating and so they go to a rehab center for eating, is they have them draw the shape of their body on a mirror, on a piece of paper. And then they put that outline up on that piece of paper and have them stand in front of the outline of what they think their body looks like. And unfailingly, none of those people have an accurate image. None of those people can actually draw what the shape of their body is. And I don't think that just applies to them. I think all of us have a little bit of a distorted vision of who we are. If we were asked to draw on a piece of paper the outline of us as people of God, as people and humans living in this world, we would have a distorted image of what that looks like. Because sometimes mirrors lie. Today in Hebrews 3, we have the preacher who lifts up two mirrors that we should consider as we go about living our lives as people of God. Two mirrors that the people who heard Hebrews should reflect upon. The first set of people, the preacher intends for us to see as good mirrors, good reflections that we should try to be like. Now, there was no person in the church, in the early church, who was more revered than Moses. In first century Judaism, Moses was the epitome of who you could be as a person of faith. If you were going to live your life dedicated to God, you should try to be as much like Moses as possible. And so the first person that the preacher lifts up is Moses. The preacher says that Moses was able to live as a faithful person even in the midst of adversity. That even in the middle of the desert, Moses was faithful to God. Not a perfect person. Moses had a couple incidences that caused him to not be able to go into paradise with the rest of the group. He had a little bit of an anger problem. He had a little bit of a I'm going to boss people around problem. Moses was not perfect, but he was someone that the Hebrews writer thought that the people could mirror themselves off of because he had perseverance in faith. The second good example, which was a better example, of course, was Jesus. The writer says that if we can mimic ourselves off of Jesus, that if we can look in the mirror that is Jesus' life as given to us in the Gospels, that we will learn what it is to live as a faithful person. That Jesus is the person to whom we should be looking to be like. That Jesus who was humble and kind, Jesus who reached out to the orphans and the widows, Jesus who allowed all people to sit at his table, whether they were lepers or tax collectors, that is the person, the writer says, that you shouldn't try to copy. Jesus had flaws and faults too. Jesus also had a little bit of a temper problem. Jesus who would weep for his friends, Jesus who mourned, Jesus who was not as patient maybe with Peter as he should have been, but was an example of what living a life of faith looked like, and was the best example because, of course, he was also God. Now, just like there are good examples, there are bad examples. And the Hebrews writer says that you should look also to the people Moses was with and not be anything like the Hebrews who were wandering in the desert. They were whiny. They thought they knew best. They didn't accept what I gave them. They didn't like the manna from heaven. They were a little grouchy about the fiery pillars of smoke that led them through the desert. He said, these are the people who hardened their hearts. They are the ones who decided that God was not God in their lives anymore. Don't be like them. He said they gave up. They did not have the perseverance of faith. They did not trust that God would deliver them. And so they went to other routes. They went to other places. They tried to be other people. These are a bad example for you. You should not be like these people. And you can learn from their example just as well as you can learn from the good ones. God did not allow the people of the desert into the time of rest because they were not willing to do the hard work, the hard work of following where God led. They were not willing to be the people of God, to persevere even when the steps were hard. And so God did not give them rest. The writer goes on to say that when we follow the example of those with perseverance, that there will be a day, there will be a time when you, like God, will experience a rest. You will experience a time of peace and of comfort. It's hard work, this perseverance, but you can do it. If Moses can do it, so can you. And the way that Moses did it is by being assured constantly that God had everything under control. That God had already saved them from the desert. God had delivered them from Egypt, and just like God had delivered them from Egypt, God would also deliver them from the desert. It was that assurance of the salvation already promised to them that caused Moses to persevere. And so I wonder what mirrors we are looking into. Who are the people we have decided to pattern our lives after, whether consciously or unconsciously? And are those the type of mirrors that are going to lead to perseverance in life, who are going to give us the strength and courage to face every day new? Who are you mirroring? And are those people the kind of people who are going to give you and remind you of the assurance of your salvation? Who we choose to follow, who we choose to allow to influence us, who we choose to be our examples in life, shape who we are. And are we following people like Moses and like Jesus who are going to lead us to the promised land, or are we following folks who are just going to harden our hearts and make it impossible for us to persevere? And on the same hand, what kind of mirrors are we being to the world? If people looked to us, what kind of God would they see? If people looked to you, what would they know about God? What would they see about God? What reflection are you giving out into the world? And is it a message of perseverance? Is it a message of hope? Is it a message of love like the one that Jesus gave to the people that he interacted with? What kind of reflection are you being in the world? Because the truth is that people look to us, those of us who call us Christians, to see what it is that God's all about. They look to us to be reflections of Jesus Christ. And whatever it is that you are doing in the world, whether you are being Moses or whether you are being the Hebrew people, is a reflection of God. So is that the reflection you want people to see? I think we have a good, positive thing to say to the world. I think that if we go out into the world trying to be like Moses and trying to be like Jesus, then we will reflect the kind of God that other people want to look at too, the kind of God that other people want to get to know. So can we be windows that let God's light into the world? What do people know about God because of your life? And you can choose. You can decide what kind of reflection that's going to be. Will you pray with me? God, we have so many people who have lived this life of faith, who have been examples for us, people who we can mirror out into the world. There are people throughout history and time who have tried to walk in faith, who have sought to be the kind of people that you would hope for us to be in the world. Help us to follow their example. God, there are people in our lives who have been good examples for you, who have been good mirrors of your life of faith. And there are some who have been bad, And we can learn from both examples. And so we ask that you help us to discern which we should follow, where we should go. We ask that you help us to honor those who have given us paths of righteousness, of hope. As we consider what kind of mirror we are of you in the world, what kind of example people see in us, what kind of reflection of you we carry with us in the world, we ask that you help us to polish up those mirrors so they can more honestly and truly reflect who you have called us to be. Help us to look into our hearts and to lead a life that reflects your light. We ask all these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.